The world watched in horror as Notre Dame burned, flames devouring centuries of history. But what most people didn't see was hidden deep inside the chaos. Relics long buried by the mysterious Knights Templar suddenly emerged, secrets they spent centuries trying to hide. Some say these artifacts hold forbidden knowledge, others whisper of curses and revenge. And now, for the first time, we uncover what the Templars never wanted anyone to find. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see why history itself is hiding the truth from us. I still remember the moment I heard the news. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city seems to hold its breath. I was scrolling through my phone when a breaking news alert flashed across the screen: Notre Dame Cathedral in flames. At first, I couldn't believe it. Notre Dame, the symbol of history, of faith, of centuries of human effort, burning in front of the world. I rushed to the television. The screen was filled with smoke and fire, devouring the iconic spire, the centuries-old wooden beams turning to ash. People were screaming, running, some filming, some praying. The news anchors tried to explain what was happening, but words failed. You could hear the shock, the disbelief in their voices. I sat there, frozen, feeling something strange inside me, a mix of grief, fear, and curiosity. But then, as the initial panic settled, I noticed something in the background of one of the live feeds. A small group of people seemed to be searching through the debris, carefully, deliberately. Unlike the firefighters, who were trying to save what they could, these people seemed to be looking for something else. Something hidden. That's when the historians started whispering. Notre Dame had always been full of secrets. Hidden chambers, old manuscripts, relics of saints, and, according to some, ties to one of the most secretive orders in history, the Knights Templar. The Templars. They were known for their courage, their mysterious rituals, and above all, the treasures and knowledge they protected. For centuries, rumors had swirled about their relics being hidden in places of worship across Europe. And now, something suggested that the flames had uncovered what no one had seen for hundreds of years. I decided to dig deeper. I began reading articles, watching every news clip, following historians and experts on social media. And the more I learned, the stranger it became. Notre Dame was not just a cathedral. It was a repository of hidden knowledge. Every stone, every arch, every stained glass window had a story. But some stories were darker, and some were meant to stay hidden. Until now. One historian, a quiet man who spent his life studying medieval Europe, said something that stayed with me. When the Templars hid their relics, they didn't just hide objects. They hid truths. Truths that could change how we see history, power, and faith itself. I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but I felt the weight of it. He was speaking about secrets buried for centuries, now suddenly exposed by fire and chaos. The next day, I visited Notre Dame. Well, I couldn't go inside, the cathedral was cordoned off, the air thick with smoke and ash, but I walked the perimeter, among people who had come just to witness what remained. The smell of burning wood and stone lingered in the air, heavy and bitter. Tourists, locals, journalists, and historians mingled, all drawn by the same fascination. The destruction, yes, but also the hidden. And then I heard a story from one of the local guides, an elderly man who had been working near Notre Dame for decades. His hands trembled as he spoke. There are chambers no one is supposed to see, he said. Hidden rooms beneath the floor, behind walls. The Templars built them. They left things in there. Things meant to be found only when the time was right. I felt a shiver run down my spine. It sounded like something out of a storybook, yet he spoke with such conviction that I couldn't ignore it. He told me that the fire had weakened parts of the cathedral that had stood untouched for centuries. Beams had fallen, walls had cracked, revealing passages and hidden corners that had never been explored. According to him, what the flames destroyed was visible to all, but what they revealed, that was another matter entirely. Over the next few days, reports began to trickle in. Small groups of historians and archaeologists had been allowed to enter restricted areas. They found scrolls, old manuscripts, and relics. Tiny objects, yes, but ones that carried immense historical significance. Some bore the Templar cross. Some had symbols no one could decipher. Some seemed to be part of a collection that had been deliberately hidden for a purpose. And that's when the theories started. Some historians claimed the relics were merely ceremonial objects, harmless symbols of faith. Others whispered about forbidden knowledge, rituals, and power. Could the Templars have hidden something that threatened the church or kings of their time? Could these relics explain the rise and fall of empires, wars, or secret alliances? I didn't know what to think, but I knew one thing. History had just handed us a puzzle that had remained unsolved for centuries. I became obsessed. I read every report, every article, every post. I watched videos from historians explaining how fragile the discovery was, how much of the evidence could still be lost if not handled carefully. And I began to feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. Something dangerous. Something forbidden. One evening, as the sun set over Paris, I returned to the cathedral. The fire was gone, but the scent of smoke lingered. The streets were quiet now, the initial chaos replaced by a tense calm. I looked at Notre Dame, its silhouette against the orange sky, and I realized, this was more than a fire. It was a revelation. A wake-up call. And somewhere inside, hidden in the shadows and rubble, were relics that could rewrite history. I didn't know who would find them, or what secrets they would reveal. But I knew that this story, the story of fire, loss, and hidden Templar relics, was only just beginning. And I had to follow it, no matter where it led. The morning after the fire, the city felt different. Paris had its usual rhythm, the streets alive with traffic and chatter, but near Notre Dame, something had changed. There was a quiet tension, a feeling that the world had shifted slightly on its axis. People were still gathering around the cathedral, some curious, some mourning. But historians and experts had begun moving quietly behind barricades, their faces drawn, focused, almost reverent. I returned to watch them work, standing just outside the cordoned-off area. I couldn't help but notice the meticulous way they moved. Every stone lifted, every beam shifted, every piece of ash examined. It was slow, painstaking work, almost ritualistic in nature. I realized then that what was happening wasn't just archaeology. It was a hunt for something that had been hidden for centuries. And then I heard the first whispers. The kind of whispers that make your heart race. "They've found something," one of the onlookers murmured. "A small chest, covered in soot. Looks ancient." I pushed closer, trying to get a glimpse, but the barricades kept us at bay. Still, I could see the shape of the object, just barely peeking from under a pile of charred debris. It was small, maybe the size of a shoebox, but there was something about it that made even the experts pause. One of them reached out, touched it lightly, and whispered a word I couldn't hear. But the look on their face said it all. This was significant. Later, I learned more from an archaeologist who had been allowed to examine the relics firsthand. He explained that what they had found was not just a box, but a container designed to preserve something important. Inside were small items, metal objects engraved with crosses, scraps of parchment with faded writing, and tiny stones etched with symbols. Nothing overtly spectacular at first glance, but the craftsmanship and the age made them extraordinary. He told me, "These are not ordinary objects. The Templars were careful. Everything they hid had a purpose. Every symbol, every line, every mark was meant to communicate something, to someone who knew how to read it." I felt a chill. The thought that these small, unassuming relics could carry secrets centuries old was staggering. It was like holding a fragment of a puzzle that had been deliberately broken into pieces and scattered across time. And now, fire had reunited some of those pieces, if only briefly. I asked him if they knew what the symbols meant. He shook his head. "Not yet. There are experts on medieval codes and Templar history working on it, but these aren't simple marks. They're cryptic, layered. Some of them may reference locations, others rituals. Some may even contain warnings." Warnings. The word echoed in my mind. The Templars had hidden these relics for a reason. Maybe they were protecting knowledge. Maybe they were hiding it from those who would misuse it. Or maybe, just maybe, it was meant to be found only in the right time, under extraordinary circumstances. And here it was, centuries later, uncovered by fire and chaos. I spent hours thinking about that small chest. I imagined the Templars moving through Notre Dame in secret, carrying objects like these, hiding them behind walls or under floors, whispering oaths as they did so. Their lives were dangerous, filled with political intrigue, enemies, and the constant threat of betrayal. And yet, they had taken the time to ensure that certain knowledge would survive, hidden away, until someone was ready to find it. Later that day, I managed to speak to another historian, a woman who had studied Templar relics for over 20 years. She was cautious, but her excitement was evident. These objects, she said, could change what we know about the Templars. Not just their history, but their methods, their beliefs, and their reach. If even one piece of this puzzle is genuine, it could rewrite parts of medieval history. She went on to explain that the Templars were not just warriors. They were bankers, scholars, and guardians of secrets. Many of their relics were thought lost forever. Churches had been built over their old sanctuaries, wars had destroyed their archives, and yet, here in the ruins of Notre Dame, pieces had survived. And the fire, she said softly, almost as if saying it aloud could make it vanish, the fire may have been the only thing that could reveal them. I didn't know whether to feel awe or fear. Awe, because centuries-old secrets were finally coming to light. Fear, because I had a sense that some of these secrets were dangerous, that they weren't meant for the world yet. I thought of the small chest again, the symbols etched into metal, the fragile parchment, and the tiny stones. Each one a fragment of a story, a message, or a warning that had been carefully preserved. And then, just as I was about to leave, the guide I had spoken to in part 1 approached me. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly. "There's more," he said in a hushed tone. "They've found something bigger. Something they didn't expect." He wouldn't tell me what it was. He said it was under tight security, handled only by a select group of historians and experts. But he did give me one detail that made my stomach turn. "It's connected to the Templars' most guarded relics," he whispered. "The ones that even kings and popes tried to find. And now, they may have found them." I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the fire, the chest, the symbols, and now, this new discovery. It felt like the world had shifted on its axis, like a door had been opened that should have stayed closed. I couldn't stop imagining what could be inside. A map. A code. A key to something greater than any of us could comprehend. And then I realized something else. I wasn't just curious anymore. I was obsessed. I had to know what these relics were. I had to understand what the Templars had hidden and why. And most importantly, I had to find out what secrets had survived the fire, and what dangers might be released along with them. That night, as the city slept and Notre Dame stood like a scarred giant over Paris, I made a silent promise to myself. I would follow this story to the very end. I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Because the Templars had hidden something here, something powerful, something that could change how we see history forever. And I was going to find out what it was. The days after the initial discovery were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the chest and its contents. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the fragile parchment, the etched symbols, and the tiny stones. I felt like I was chasing shadows, following clues that had been left for someone else centuries ago, and now somehow they were within reach. Then, the first reports came in about the relics themselves. A small team of historians, cryptographers, and medieval scholars had been given access under strict security. They were working around the clock, examining every detail, photographing, cataloging, and most importantly, trying to decipher the symbols. The first thing they noticed was that the objects were not random. Each piece was carefully constructed, with marks that seemed to point to something larger. One of the metal items, a small, circular medallion engraved with a cross and a series of lines, was particularly intriguing. The historians speculated that it could be a kind of key, a map, or even a code. I remember reading one report where an expert said, the Templars were masters of secrecy. They used symbols, numbers, and geometric patterns to hide messages. If you look closely, everything has meaning. That statement haunted me. I kept imagining the Templars walking through Notre Dame centuries ago, hiding objects and leaving clues that only the most knowledgeable could understand. One night, I stayed up late, poring over images of the relics posted online by the historians. There were sketches, diagrams, and high-resolution photos. I noticed patterns that no one else seemed to mention, the way certain symbols repeated, the way some lines aligned almost geometrically. My curiosity turned into obsession. I wanted to understand what they were trying to communicate. Then came the first breakthrough. One of the researchers discovered a series of markings on the parchment that resembled an old cipher used by the Templars. It wasn't a simple substitution code. It was layered, almost like a puzzle within a puzzle. Every symbol, every mark, every line had a dual meaning. Some represented letters. Some represented numbers. Some were references to biblical passages. Others were references to locations. The historian described it like this. It's as if they were giving instructions. Instructions that could only be followed by someone trained to understand them. And yet, the moment we uncovered it, we realized how dangerous it could be if it fell into the wrong hands. I felt a chill. Dangerous. How could these relics be dangerous? I had imagined treasures, lost knowledge, maybe even maps to secret locations. But danger. That added an entirely new layer to the story. The Templars had hidden these relics for centuries, but now, in the chaos of a fire, the world could see them. And that meant someone, or some people, might want them for purposes far beyond history lessons or museum displays. The next few days were a whirlwind of speculation. Newspapers, online forums, and social media exploded with theories. Some said the relics contained the location of hidden Templar treasure. Others suggested forbidden knowledge, rituals, or secrets that the Church had deliberately erased from history. I watched it all unfold with a sense of awe and fear. I decided to dig deeper. I contacted a historian who specialized in Templar history, someone who had spent decades studying their codes and relics. We spoke late at night, and he explained something that changed my understanding of the discovery entirely. You have to understand, he said, his voice quiet, almost reverent. The Templars were not just hiding objects. They were hiding a message. A message to the future. They believed that certain knowledge could only be revealed when the time was right. And perhaps now, with Notre Dame burning, that time has come. He went on to describe the relics in more detail. Some symbols were astronomical, mapping the stars and planets in ways that could guide travelers. Others were religious, referencing rituals and ceremonies meant to preserve knowledge. And some were warnings. Warnings about betrayal, corruption, and the misuse of power. I couldn't believe it. The Templars had lived hundreds of years ago, yet their careful planning meant that their message could still reach us today. And yet, it wasn't a message that anyone could simply read. It required study, patience, and perhaps, intuition. As I thought about all of this, I realized something else. The fire that had devastated Notre Dame might have been a catalyst. The chaos it caused, the damage it revealed, and the attention it drew, all of it created the perfect conditions for the relics to surface. It was almost as if history itself had waited for this moment, orchestrating events over centuries to ensure that these secrets were discovered at the right time. And yet, the mystery deepened. For every symbol deciphered, a dozen more remained obscure. For every clue uncovered, new questions arose. Who had the knowledge to interpret these relics correctly? And what would happen if someone misused that knowledge? I began to follow the research closely, reading reports late into the night, watching live streams of scholars analyzing the relics. Every discovery added another layer to the story. I learned about Templar rituals, about their secret network of safe houses across Europe, about their obsession with protecting knowledge. I began to see the relics not just as objects, but as a bridge between the past and the present, between the Templars and us. One evening, as I was reviewing photos of the medallion, I noticed something strange. A symbol etched into its surface seemed familiar. It resembled a mark I had seen in a manuscript describing a Templar treasure hidden in France. Could this medallion be part of a larger puzzle? Could it point to something still buried, waiting to be found? I knew then that the story was far from over. The relics had revealed themselves, yes, but they were only the beginning. There was a deeper mystery lurking beneath the surface, one that would take patience, research, and perhaps courage to uncover. And I realized, with a mix of fear and excitement, that I was now part of that journey. The Templars had left a message for the future. And for the first time in centuries, it was being heard. The days after the discovery of the relics were tense. Notre Dame had quieted down now, the fire was out, the smoke cleared, and the city was trying to return to normal, but something lingered in the air near the cathedral. A sense that history had shifted. That something important had been uncovered. That the Templars' secrets, carefully hidden for centuries, were finally being revealed. I kept going back to the reports, trying to understand exactly what had been found. The chest, the metal medallions, the fragile parchments, all of it. And the more I read, the more I realized just how deliberate these objects were. Nothing was left to chance. Every symbol, every line, every curve had purpose. And when combined, they told a story, one that had been waiting patiently for someone to unravel it. Then, a historian I had been following online shared a theory that sent chills down my spine. These relics, he said in a live stream, were not hidden merely for preservation. They were hidden as a warning. The Templars wanted future generations to understand certain truths, but only those they deemed worthy. I paused the video, leaning back in my chair. Worthy. That implied that whoever stumbled upon the relics could be tested. It wasn't just about discovery. It was about understanding, interpreting, and acting correctly. The Templars had always been meticulous, their methods precise. If these relics were meant to survive centuries and remain undeciphered until a specific moment, then someone, or something, had carefully orchestrated this timing. As I dug deeper, I discovered that some of the parchment contained diagrams that were more than just symbols. They resembled maps that pointed to locations within Paris itself, and possibly beyond. One diagram showed an alignment with the cathedral's original architecture, suggesting that certain objects or rooms had been designed to guide someone who understood the symbols. Another diagram hinted at cryptic locations in rural France, places associated with the Templars' hidden estates, now centuries-old ruins. I couldn't stop thinking about what this meant. These relics weren't just fragments of history. They were instructions. Instructions left by the Templars to be followed, if, and only if, someone could decode them correctly. And that meant there was potential for both knowledge and danger. The Templars had survived because they had been cautious. And now, through fire and chance, their legacy was resurfacing. But it wasn't just scholars who were interested. Rumors began circulating that certain private collectors, treasure hunters, and even clandestine organizations had caught wind of the discovery. Some were motivated by history, some by greed. And suddenly, the relics weren't just academic curiosities, they were objects of desire. Objects that could grant power to the wrong hands. I felt a sense of urgency. If the relics were instructions, if they pointed to hidden locations or knowledge, then timing mattered. Someone could misinterpret the symbols, stumble upon something dangerous, or exploit it. That thought kept me awake at night. I realized that the story wasn't just about history. It was about the present and the future. Whoever controlled these relics could influence more than just knowledge. They could wield influence, maybe even power, in ways that had been carefully shielded from the world for centuries. I began following every lead, reading every scholarly article, watching live streams of experts discussing the relics. Some believed they were purely symbolic, tools of religious teaching. Others insisted they were literal, maps, keys, or devices designed to conceal treasure or forbidden knowledge. And then there were the fringe theories. Some whispered about Templar curses, warnings of misfortune for those who misused the relics. One evening, I managed to speak to a curator at a small Paris museum who had handled one of the smaller artifacts. She was cautious, but her voice betrayed excitement. "These relics are remarkable," she said. "The craftsmanship alone is astounding. But the Templars weren't showing off. They were hiding messages. And these messages, well, they may require action, not just study." Action. That word lingered in my mind. The Templars had spent decades, even centuries, preparing for a moment like this. They had carefully encrypted messages, hidden objects, and perhaps even created a sequence of discoveries to guide the worthy. The thought that someone could stumble into this sequence unprepared, or worse, with malicious intent, was terrifying. I also learned about the internal debates among the historians themselves. Some argued that the relics should be kept under strict observation, analyzed only in controlled conditions. Others pushed for public access, arguing that history belonged to everyone. And then there were the quiet whispers of collectors and private groups, suggesting that the objects could be sold, or worse, used as leverage in ways no one could anticipate. All of this added a new layer of complexity to the story. The relics were no longer just remnants of the past. They were catalysts, capable of influencing the present, drawing attention, and testing human intentions. And I realized something important. The Templars had designed their secrecy with purpose. They had built a system that could reward wisdom and understanding but punish greed and ignorance. I began to feel a strange connection to the Templars themselves. Here were people who lived centuries ago, facing dangers and enemies I could barely imagine, yet they had the foresight to hide messages for future generations. They had thought about me, or someone like me, long before I existed. And now, through fire, chaos and chance, their plans were unfolding. That night, I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by notes, sketches, and digital images of the relics. I realized that my role was no longer passive. I wasn't just an observer. I had become part of the unfolding story. And the deeper I delved, the clearer it became. This was about more than history. It was about secrets, responsibility, and the careful balance between knowledge and power. And then I came across a note that made my blood run cold. One of the researchers had found an inscription on the back of a medallion. It was simple, but deliberate. "The seeker who misinterprets will awaken consequences beyond measure." I read it over and over, the words echoing in my mind. Consequences. The Templars had warned the future. And now, with the relics exposed by fire, with scholars and others examining them, the world was walking a fine line. Every action, every interpretation, every step could have unforeseen consequences. I realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that this was only the beginning. The relics were revealing their secrets, piece by piece, but each revelation brought more questions. Hidden rooms, secret locations, coded instructions, they were all part of a larger puzzle. And the Templars, in their wisdom, had ensured that only those prepared to understand and respect the legacy could follow it safely. That night, as the city slept and Notre Dame stood like a scarred sentinel over Paris, I understood something profound. The story of the Templar relics was not just about discovery. It was about responsibility, about choice, and about the careful unfolding of secrets meant to test humanity itself. And I knew deep down that the next chapter would bring revelations far more astonishing, and far more dangerous, than anything discovered so far. The following week, I realized that the story of the relics had begun to take on a life of its own. The city around Notre Dame seemed unchanged on the surface, yet beneath it, an invisible tension hung like a storm cloud. Scholars and historians were poring over the objects, deciphering symbols and comparing them to maps, manuscripts, and medieval codes. And some of those codes, just barely legible, seemed to point toward specific locations. It was the first time I truly understood that these relics weren't just artifacts. They were instructions. Carefully layered, deliberately hidden. And someone, or some group, had to follow them correctly to unlock their full meaning. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. The Templars, centuries ago, had designed a system that was still functional today. And now, people were beginning to test it. The first location was within Notre Dame itself. One of the medallions, when placed in a certain spot on the cathedral floor, aligned with markings that were nearly invisible to the naked eye. Researchers discovered that this alignment pointed to a hidden recess beneath the stone floorboards. When the boards were carefully lifted, they found a small cavity containing a scroll and a set of intricately carved objects. The scroll was fragile, the ink faded, but it contained writing in a combination of Latin and coded symbols. Experts confirmed that it was indeed a Templar message, part instruction, part warning. The objects, meanwhile, were unlike anything I had ever seen. Small metal instruments, engraved with the Templar cross, each with delicate etchings that suggested they were tools for rituals or measurements. I remember reading the reports late that night and feeling a strange connection to the centuries-old mystery. The Templars had been meticulous in hiding their relics. They had counted on fire, time, and human curiosity to reveal them under the right conditions. And now, those conditions had arrived. But as the discoveries continued, the first signs of tension emerged. Not everyone agreed on how the relics should be handled. Some historians argued for extreme caution, suggesting that the objects be studied in controlled conditions. Others wanted to explore further, following the instructions on the scrolls and medallions to see where they led. And lurking quietly in the background were private collectors and treasure hunters, who were already making discreet inquiries about access. I began to realize that the Templars' warnings were not merely symbolic. Misinterpretation could be dangerous. Already, small disagreements among scholars were escalating into heated debates. A minor mistake in reading the symbols could lead someone to the wrong location, or worse, trigger unforeseen consequences. The first attempts to follow the relics' instructions outside of Notre Dame began cautiously. Teams of historians and archaeologists were dispatched to locations hinted at in the coded maps. These sites were not random. They included ancient churches, abandoned Templar estates, and secluded areas in rural France. Each site held fragments of the puzzle, some physical objects, some documents, and some inscriptions carved into stone that had survived centuries of weather and neglect. One discovery stood out. In a ruined estate in rural Normandy, a hidden chamber beneath the floorboards contained another set of objects. Small statues, engraved stones, and a leather-bound book that appeared to have been untouched for hundreds of years. The pages were brittle, and the writing was nearly impossible to read, but one historian confirmed that the symbols matched those on the medallions and scrolls from Notre Dame. I couldn't help but imagine the Templars centuries ago, moving through these same spaces in secret, carrying the same objects, whispering prayers, and hiding their knowledge from the world. Their lives had been dangerous, filled with political intrigue, wars, and enemies. And yet, they had the foresight to hide these clues, knowing that one day, someone might discover them and continue the story. But with every step forward, the tension grew. At one location, a small fire broke out in a partially restored chamber, destroying part of the newly uncovered artifacts. No one was hurt, but the incident sparked heated arguments among the teams. Was it an accident, or a warning? Some whispered about the Templars' supposed curses, suggesting that mishandling the relics could bring misfortune. Others scoffed at the idea, insisting it was coincidence. I couldn't stop thinking about the implications. The relics were a bridge between centuries, connecting the Templars' intentions with our present. And they carried lessons, warnings perhaps, for those who would try to exploit them, and guidance for those who were patient and respectful. Meanwhile, the news of the discoveries spread quietly, mostly through scholarly journals and controlled announcements. But rumors began to reach the wider public. Speculators, collectors, and conspiracy theorists started circulating theories online. Some believed the relics were part of a hidden treasure, gold and jewels left by the Templars. Others suggested that the objects contained forbidden knowledge, rituals, or even secrets that could undermine powerful institutions. I began to feel a sense of urgency. The story was no longer just about history or archaeology. It was about timing and responsibility. Whoever controlled the relics, whoever could interpret the codes, had the power to unlock secrets that had been guarded for centuries. And that meant the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. As I read each report, I felt a growing connection to the mystery. I was no longer a passive observer. I was part of a story that spanned centuries. The Templars had left clues, warnings, and instructions. And now, through the chaos of fire and human curiosity, those clues were beginning to be followed. And with each step, the story became more complex, more dangerous, and more compelling. That night, I sat at my desk, surrounded by notes, images, and maps. I realized that the Templars had designed a system that was still alive, still functional, and still capable of testing those who encountered it. The relics were not just artifacts. They were challenges, puzzles, and perhaps even traps. Every decision, every interpretation, could have consequences. And yet, despite the risk, the discoveries continued. Each new artifact, each new symbol, each new piece of the puzzle added depth to the story, revealing a network of hidden knowledge that stretched across centuries. I felt a strange mix of awe, fear, and excitement. The Templars had prepared for this moment, and now, centuries later, the story was unfolding before me. I realized that this journey was only beginning. The relics had revealed their first secrets, but the larger mystery, the one that could change how we understand history, was still hidden. And I knew that in the coming days, weeks, and months, the stakes would rise, the tension would grow, and the consequences of discovery would become clearer. Because the Templars had left more than relics. They had left a test, a story that could only be completed by those patient, careful, and wise enough to follow their trail. And I was determined to follow it, no matter the danger. By the time I reached part 6 in following this story, the Templar relics had begun to reveal something extraordinary. Scholars and historians were working tirelessly, trying to decode the layers of symbols, maps, and inscriptions left behind centuries ago. And finally, the first major revelation emerged, one that shook the academic community and sent ripples through everyone following the story. It all started with a small leather-bound book recovered from one of the hidden chambers in Normandy. The book was fragile, its pages yellowed and brittle, and yet the symbols etched inside were unmistakably Templar. At first glance, it looked like another set of instructions. But when experts began decoding it, they realized it contained a sequence, a plan, almost like a guide for locating something much larger. I remember reading the report late at night. The words made my hands shake. The relics, combined with the maps and medallions, pointed to a location within Paris, beneath Notre Dame itself, a room that had been sealed for centuries. This room had never been documented in modern records, and no architect or historian had ever mentioned it. The Templars had hidden it deliberately, and its existence had been preserved only through their coded instructions. The historians were cautious. They didn't want to disturb the cathedral's foundations, and rightly so. But the possibility of discovering a completely hidden chamber, untouched for centuries, was irresistible. The team carefully planned the excavation, using the maps and symbols to guide them. Every step had to be precise. One miscalculation could destroy centuries of history in an instant. As I followed their progress, I began to understand the scope of what the Templars had left behind. This wasn't just about relics. They had created a network of messages, objects, and hidden locations that formed a centuries-long puzzle. And it became clear that the first chamber wasn't just a hiding place. It was a starting point, the first step in a journey they had designed for someone to follow. The day the historians finally reached the sealed room, the atmosphere was electric. Paris was quiet that morning, the city going about its usual rhythm, but within the cathedral, there was a tense anticipation. Tools carefully removed stones, and the air was thick with dust and history. And then, finally, they had opened it. Inside, the chamber was small but meticulously arranged. Stone shelves lined the walls, and upon them sat objects that seemed ordinary at first, but each one was extraordinary. Metal instruments, engraved crosses, small scrolls, and more medallions, each carrying symbols that connected to those already discovered. It was like stepping into a Templar library, a carefully curated collection designed to convey knowledge across centuries. But there was more. In the center of the room lay a large chest, far bigger than the one first discovered in Notre Dame. Its surface was engraved with symbols that radiated outward, forming a pattern that matched diagrams in the leather-bound book. Experts described it as a master key, a culmination of everything the Templars had hidden until this moment. I couldn't stop thinking about the centuries of secrecy that led to this moment. The Templars had risked everything to protect this knowledge. Wars, persecution, and betrayal hadn't been enough to destroy it. And now, after fire and chaos, the knowledge had resurfaced. However, the discovery also brought immediate tension. There were disagreements among the team on how to proceed. Some insisted on cataloging everything first, taking extreme care not to damage anything. Others argued that the chest needed to be opened immediately to understand its purpose. And behind the scenes, whispers of private collectors and shadowy figures wanting to get access created a quiet but palpable tension. One historian confided in me that morning, "We are standing on the edge of history, but we are also standing on the edge of something dangerous." The Templars left warnings. They did not intend for just anyone to access this knowledge. Misuse could have consequences we can't even imagine. The words echoed in my mind. Misuse. Consequences. The relics were revealing themselves, yes, but only to those careful enough to follow the Templars' rules. And yet, human curiosity and greed are not so easily restrained. The chest itself was fascinating. Its carvings weren't just symbols, they were instructions. Open it incorrectly, and the contents could be damaged or lost. Open it carefully, and it could reveal centuries of hidden knowledge. The team decided to take meticulous precautions, documenting every step, photographing, and measuring. Every symbol, every hinge, every detail was scrutinized before the chest was touched. As the chest was finally opened, the room filled with a tangible energy, almost like a current running through the air. Inside were objects that defied simple explanation. Ancient manuscripts, each filled with writing and diagrams, small ceremonial items, and objects that seemed to resonate with power, at least symbolically. Experts began analyzing them immediately, noting patterns, symbols, and possible uses. I realized then that this was a turning point. The first major revelation was not just about discovery. It was about understanding the depth and foresight of the Templars. They had not hidden objects for safekeeping alone. They had hidden knowledge, a plan, a network of secrets intended to guide, test, and perhaps warn future generations. Yet, even as the discoveries were made, questions multiplied. What exactly did the Templars intend with these instructions? Were the relics meant to guide someone to treasure, or to wisdom? And what were the consequences for missteps? Every historian, every researcher involved, seemed to feel the weight of the centuries pressing down on them. That night, I sat alone, surrounded by sketches and notes, trying to piece together what had been revealed. The fire that had devastated Notre Dame had done more than destroy, it had revealed. And with the first major chamber unlocked, it became clear that the Templars' network was far more sophisticated than anyone could have imagined. I realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that we were only at the beginning. The relics had revealed their first secrets, but the larger story, the one that could change how we understand history, was still hidden. And somewhere, hidden in the designs, symbols, and instructions, lay the next step. The Templars had left a path, carefully constructed, centuries in the making. And now, it was up to those who followed to walk it wisely, or risk losing the knowledge, and perhaps facing the consequences the Templars had warned about. The days after the discovery of the hidden chamber beneath Notre Dame were electrifying and tense. The chest, once opened, revealed its secrets, but each artifact and manuscript seemed to bring more questions than answers. I spent hours reading reports, analyzing photographs, and watching live streams of historians as they worked to decode the Templars' messages. Every day felt like stepping further into a labyrinth, with no guarantee of emerging safely on the other side. The first manuscript grabbed everyone's attention. It was leather-bound, delicate, and filled with a mixture of Latin, coded symbols, and geometric diagrams. At first glance, it seemed indecipherable. The symbols were intricate, repeated in patterns that hinted at layers of meaning. Some symbols aligned with the medallions and smaller artifacts. Others appeared to correspond with locations, dates, and astronomical events. It was a level of planning that made even seasoned scholars pause in awe. I remember reading a historian's report that described the initial reaction to the manuscript. "We have never encountered anything like this. It's not merely a record or inventory. It's a blueprint, an entire network of information hidden across locations, time, and symbols. To understand it fully requires patience, intelligence, and caution." Caution. That word came up repeatedly. The Templars had hidden these relics for centuries, and the warnings were clear. Mishandling or misinterpreting them could lead to consequences, perhaps not physical, but dangerous nonetheless. And already, signs of tension were emerging among the scholars and teams involved. Some historians were strict and methodical. They wanted to study every page, every symbol, every artifact, documenting and photographing everything before attempting any further steps. Others argued that the Templars' instructions implied movement, that following the sequence in real time was necessary to fully understand the message. The debate quickly escalated into heated discussions. Voices were raised, theories clashed, and subtle disagreements became arguments. Meanwhile, rumors of outside interest began to surface. Private collectors and shadowy organizations had learned of the relics and were quietly attempting to get access. These weren't scholars or historians. They were people motivated by power, wealth, or influence. Some whispered about selling artifacts on the black market, others about exploiting the secrets for political leverage. It was clear that the Templars' warnings might be necessary in more ways than one. I became obsessed with the manuscripts myself. Late at night, I would study photos and sketches, tracing lines with my fingers, trying to understand the connections between symbols, locations, and artifacts. Slowly, patterns emerged. One symbol repeated across different objects, a triangle intersected by a cross. Experts suggested it might represent a hidden location or a principle of Templar belief. Another symbol resembled a star map, aligning with the equinox. Some theorized it could indicate a specific time for an event or ritual. As the experts worked, the manuscripts revealed subtle instructions embedded within the text. Certain words, repeated in unusual sequences, hinted at hidden chambers or concealed objects. Other passages contained warnings, cryptic phrases like, "Only those who follow the path with care shall see the truth." The tension among the researchers escalated when a small disagreement arose over how to interpret one passage. One historian suggested that a specific symbol indicated a location outside Paris. Another argued it was metaphorical, meant to convey a principle rather than a place. The debate became heated, and I realized just how fragile this discovery was. Human ego, impatience, or error could derail centuries of careful preservation. I also learned that the Templars had designed these manuscripts to test patience and wisdom. Any misstep, misinterpretation, or hasty decision could result in failure, or worse, misguidance that might lead someone into danger. Some experts speculated that the repeated warnings of consequences weren't superstition, they were practical. Certain chambers, hidden for centuries, could collapse or contain traps to protect the relics. Even subtle mistakes could be catastrophic. Amid all of this, I found myself thinking about the Templars as real people, not just historical figures. I imagined them walking these halls, hiding these objects, leaving behind instructions like a puzzle meant for a worthy future generation. Their intelligence, foresight, and caution were staggering. They weren't just hiding treasure, they were shaping a test that could endure through centuries. And now, centuries later, that test was beginning to unfold. The manuscripts also hinted at something more. The Templars had hidden not only objects but also knowledge. Knowledge of rituals, locations, and perhaps even political strategies. Some passages suggested they had foreseen the collapse of their order and wanted to ensure that select truths would survive. The realization was chilling. This was not merely history preserved, it was a message intended to influence the future, delivered through objects, symbols, and puzzles. As I read more, I became aware of another layer of danger. Outside the controlled academic environment, interest in the relics was growing. Unofficial reports suggested that individuals with no understanding of the Templars' rules were attempting to access artifacts. Security measures were in place, but the possibility of misinterpretation or theft added urgency. The Templars' warnings about consequences suddenly felt tangible. One night, while reviewing images of a medallion, I noticed something odd, a faint engraving that had been overlooked by the experts. It appeared to be a mark, pointing toward a location beneath an old chapel on the outskirts of Paris. I couldn't verify it myself, but it suggested that the network of Templar instructions was far larger than anyone had realized. The discovery of the chamber beneath Notre Dame had been only the beginning. I realized then that the story was evolving rapidly. The manuscripts had revealed a path, a sequence of steps carefully laid out across locations, objects, and time. But following it was not simple. Every step required careful observation, patience, and understanding of centuries-old symbols. One mistake could result in lost knowledge, or something far worse. And yet, despite the danger, despite the disagreements and growing tension, the allure was irresistible. The Templars had left a trail that demanded attention, a mystery designed to be uncovered by those willing to take it seriously. The artifacts, the symbols, the hidden chambers, they were all pieces of a grand puzzle, stretching across time and space, waiting for someone to follow it correctly. I realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that I had become part of the unfolding story. The Templars had left a test, and I was watching it come alive centuries later. Each day brought new revelations, new warnings, and new layers of complexity. And I understood that the next phase, the following discoveries, the decisions made by historians, and the reactions of those outside the academic circle, would determine whether the secrets of the Templars were preserved or lost forever. That night, as Paris slept and Notre Dame stood quietly in the shadows, I knew that the manuscripts had done more than reveal history. They had set the stage for a drama that would test patience, wisdom, and human intention. And I had a growing sense that the Templars were watching, even now, through the layers of symbols and relics they had left behind. After the manuscripts were partially decoded, the scholars realized that the Templars' network of clues extended far beyond Paris. The symbols and diagrams pointed to locations scattered across France, ruined estates, secluded chapels, and even remote forests. These sites had been hidden for centuries, deliberately removed from maps and records. The Templars had left instructions to reach them, but only for those patient, observant, and cautious enough to follow the trail. The first expedition was carefully planned. A small team of historians, archaeologists, and security personnel set out to a location in rural Burgundy, where the manuscript suggested a hidden chamber might exist beneath a decaying estate. The journey was tense from the start. Forests that had been quiet for decades suddenly felt alive, almost watchful. Paths long forgotten led them to the ruins, where ivy and moss covered the stone, and the air was thick with centuries of decay. I followed their updates closely, unable to stop thinking about what they might find. The Templars had been meticulous in hiding their relics. Each site had a purpose, and every detail in the manuscript mattered. A misplaced symbol, a misinterpreted measurement, and the hidden secrets could remain lost forever, or worse, trigger an unexpected danger. When the team reached the estate, they immediately began examining the stonework. One historian, a man who had spent decades studying Templar architecture, noticed a pattern in the floor tiles that matched a diagram in the manuscript. Carefully, they pried open a section of the floor, revealing a small chamber beneath. Inside were objects similar to those found beneath Notre Dame: metal instruments, medallions, scrolls, and small carvings. Each item had been deliberately placed, forming a collection that seemed designed to convey instructions across time. But the discovery wasn't without incident. As the team removed some of the objects, a small stone shifted, causing a minor collapse in one corner of the chamber. No one was injured, but it sent a clear warning. The Templars had built these spaces carefully, yet with hidden risks. Every step required extreme caution. Back in Paris, the discovery sparked excitement and tension. Scholars debated how to proceed, while rumors about private collectors and other groups seeking access intensified. The Templars' warnings about consequences no longer seemed abstract, they were real. Mishandling these relics could destroy history, or worse, put people in danger. The second expedition was even more challenging. A remote chapel in the Loire Valley was the next location indicated by the manuscript. Overgrown paths and centuries of neglect made it difficult to reach, and the building itself was fragile. Inside, the team discovered carvings in the walls, symbols that matched those on the medallions and manuscripts. Some were directional markers, others were symbolic, representing Templar principles or warnings. While examining the site, one of the team members found a small recess behind a stone altar. Inside were additional relics, small tools, engraved stones, and a partially decayed parchment. The document appeared to contain instructions for assembling a larger object, though its purpose was still unclear. Scholars speculated that it might have been part of a ceremonial device or a mechanical contraption, intended to convey knowledge or act as a key to another hidden location. I was fascinated, and increasingly anxious, as the discoveries continued. The Templars' network was intricate, carefully planned, and layered with meaning. Each site revealed more pieces of the puzzle, but it also raised new questions. Why had they gone to such lengths? What exactly were they protecting, and why? Even more troubling were signs that someone else was watching. The team began noticing footprints near the sites that didn't belong to them. Small disturbances suggested that others had been exploring these locations in secret. Were they collectors, treasure hunters, or something more sinister? The Templars' warnings about consequences felt increasingly relevant. At one remote site, a local farmer reported seeing strangers observing the ruins. The authorities were notified, and security around the expeditions increased. But the idea that someone outside the scholarly teams was attempting to follow the trail added a new layer of danger. The relics were no longer just a historical mystery, they were becoming a real-world challenge, with potential stakes beyond knowledge. The manuscripts continued to guide the scholars, but the complexity of the Templars' instructions became more apparent. Symbols pointed not only to locations but also to specific times, celestial alignments, and sequences of actions. Following the instructions required not just observation but understanding, an ability to interpret the Templars' logic accurately. One small error could render a discovery meaningless, or worse, lead someone into harm's way. Despite the risks, the team pressed on. Every successful discovery reinforced the idea that the Templars had intentionally created a network that could survive centuries, despite persecution, wars, and the collapse of their order. The hidden chambers and objects were not random. They formed a map of knowledge, a carefully crafted legacy designed to test the wisdom and integrity of those who discovered it. I began to feel a growing sense of awe and responsibility. The Templars had left a story that spanned centuries, and I was watching it unfold in real time. Every discovery revealed more about their intelligence, foresight, and meticulous planning. But it also revealed the fragility of human interpretation, the potential for greed, and the dangers of curiosity unchecked by caution. As I read the latest expedition reports, I realized that the story was far from over. The relics, manuscripts, and hidden chambers were just the beginning. The Templars had designed a path, a test that required patience, understanding, and respect. And now, with multiple parties involved, including those motivated by power or wealth, the stakes had never been higher. I closed my notes that night, staring at the maps and images spread across my desk. The Templars had left a trail, a network of secrets that could shape history or misfortune depending on who followed it. And I knew that the next phase, the discoveries yet to come, the challenges the scholars would face, and the conflicts that would arise, would test not only the intellect but the morality of everyone involved. The story of the Templar relics was no longer just history. It was a living puzzle, and each step forward carried the weight of centuries, the promise of revelation, and the shadow of danger. And I had a growing sense that the Templars had prepared this trial for reasons that would only become clear in the moments of highest tension and greatest risk. The calm of early discoveries was beginning to crumble. What had started as a meticulous, cautious exploration of Templar relics was now becoming tense and unpredictable. The expeditions to remote sites revealed not only the Templars' genius but also the fragility of the process, and the first real signs of interference were beginning to appear. It started with subtle hints. At one site in rural Burgundy, Objects that had been carefully catalogued were slightly disturbed. A small medallion had shifted. A scroll had been displaced. Nothing was missing, but the team noticed it immediately. Initially, they assumed it was an accident, perhaps caused by fatigue or the uneven floors of the hidden chamber. But then it happened again, at a site in the Loire Valley. A delicate carving had been scratched, almost deliberately. The experts realized that these were not accidents. They were warnings, or perhaps attempts at sabotage. The implications were chilling. The Templars had hidden their relics to protect knowledge, and now, centuries later, someone was actively trying to interfere. The possibilities were terrifying. These could be rival scholars, treasure hunters, or individuals with motives far more dangerous. The warnings etched by the Templars, consequences beyond measure, suddenly felt immediate and real. I began following the news reports and online chatter, which were now buzzing with speculation. Scholars were raising alarms about outsiders attempting to access the sites. Local authorities had been informed, and security measures were tightened, but the sheer number of remote locations made complete protection impossible. Every site, every hidden chamber, was vulnerable. Meanwhile, the manuscripts continued to guide the scholars, but interpreting them under these conditions became increasingly difficult. Every step required caution, not only to preserve history but to prevent interference from those who might exploit the relics. The Templars' layered instructions were now a shield as much as a roadmap, designed to test patience, wisdom, and moral judgment. The first confrontation occurred at a chapel in the Loire Valley. As the team prepared to examine a recess hidden beneath the altar, they noticed footprints outside the building. Moments later, a shadow appeared near the entrance. Someone was watching. The observers did not approach directly, but their presence was enough to unsettle the scholars. Was it a curious local? A collector? Or someone more sinister, willing to take risks to reach the Templar secrets? This incident sparked heated debates among the team. Some argued that they should pause the exploration until full security could be guaranteed. Others insisted that stopping now would risk missing crucial information or misinterpreting the manuscripts. The tension was palpable, with some members questioning the safety of continuing at all. And then, at the remote estate in Burgundy, a more serious problem emerged. A small fire broke out in a partially restored chamber while a team was examining objects, narrowly avoiding disaster. No one was injured, but several delicate artifacts were damaged. Investigators later found evidence suggesting it was not accidental. Something had been deliberately left to create a hazard. The Templars' warnings about consequences seemed almost prophetic now, though the exact nature of the danger was still unclear. The manuscripts hinted at the reason for these layers of protection. Certain symbols indicated that the objects could be misused if removed improperly or without understanding the intended sequence. The Templars had clearly anticipated that human greed and curiosity might interfere, and they designed their system to resist it. The warnings etched into the artifacts and manuscripts were not mystical, they were practical. Missteps could destroy the knowledge, or worse, expose individuals to unforeseen risk. Despite the growing threats, the discoveries continued. One of the most intriguing finds was an astrological diagram in a manuscript, aligning with a specific celestial event. Scholars speculated that certain hidden chambers or objects were intended to be accessed only when the stars aligned correctly, a safeguard against accidental or premature discovery. It reinforced the idea that the Templars' network was a carefully calibrated system, designed to guide, test, and protect knowledge over centuries. I began to feel the weight of the unfolding events. The Templars had not just left objects. They had created a challenge spanning centuries, designed to be solved only by the careful, patient, and morally conscious. And now, with interference, sabotage, and human greed creeping in, the stakes had shifted dramatically. Every discovery was now part of a larger high-stakes game, one that could have serious consequences for those who did not proceed with caution. The manuscripts also contained subtle warnings I had not noticed before. Phrases like "the unworthy shall falter," and "the path shall close," and "those who rush shall awaken peril," took on new meaning. They were not just moral lessons, they were instructions for survival, guiding those who could follow them correctly and warning those who could not. I realized, with a growing sense of urgency, that this was no longer purely an academic endeavor. The Templars' relics had become a live puzzle, with real-world risks and consequences. And the longer the scholars remained exposed at these sites, the greater the danger, not only from accidents but from human interference. By the end of that week, the atmosphere around the expeditions had shifted. Every movement, every discovery, was conducted under a cloud of tension. The relics were still revealing their secrets, but the threat of sabotage added a new, unpredictable layer. It was no longer just about uncovering history. It was about surviving the process and interpreting the Templars' instructions correctly under pressure. That night, as I reviewed the latest reports, I realized that the story had entered a new phase. The Templars' careful planning, their layered warnings, and their intricate instructions had not only preserved knowledge, they had created a test. And the first signs of sabotage made it clear that failure could be immediate, tangible, and dangerous. The Templars had left a path to knowledge, but they had also built safeguards, and perhaps traps, for those who did not respect it. And now, centuries later, the challenge was real. Every step forward was a risk, every discovery a potential hazard, and every decision carried weight beyond the mere pursuit of history. The story was no longer about relics alone. It was about survival, judgment, and the moral responsibility of those who dared to follow the Templars' trail. And I had a growing sense that the next discoveries, if they were to succeed, would require not only intellect but courage, intuition, and a deep respect for the centuries-old legacy unfolding before us. After weeks of careful study, cautious expeditions, and heightened tension due to sabotage attempts, the scholars finally achieved a breakthrough. One of the manuscripts, long considered a collection of fragmented symbols and diagrams, revealed its first major secret. And this revelation changed everything. The breakthrough came when a researcher noticed a pattern in a series of symbols that had previously seemed random. By cross-referencing the symbols with the medallions and diagrams recovered from the hidden chambers, she realized that they represented not just locations, but a sequence of events. The Templars had encoded instructions to assemble certain objects, align them at specific times, and perform particular actions, steps that would reveal a larger truth or hidden knowledge. The first completed sequence was tested cautiously within the chambers beneath Notre Dame. Following the instructions precisely, the team arranged medallions according to the manuscript and positioned certain objects according to the diagrams. When done correctly, a hidden compartment in the floor was revealed, another chamber, previously undetected, smaller but densely packed with artifacts and manuscripts. The discovery sent a wave of excitement through the scholarly community. The chamber contained items unlike anything previously found: intricately engraved stones, ceremonial objects, and several manuscripts that appeared to hold philosophical, mathematical, and theological knowledge. Some symbols suggested that the Templars had anticipated changes in power structures and had recorded strategies for protecting knowledge, wealth, and sacred artifacts. I remember reading the reports late at night, feeling a mix of awe and anxiety. The Templars' foresight was astonishing. They had anticipated centuries of persecution, human greed, and the collapse of their order. And yet, their instructions were precise, layered, and designed to ensure that only those patient, careful, and morally disciplined enough could access the knowledge safely. But with the breakthrough came new risks. News of the hidden chambers and discoveries inevitably began to leak beyond academic circles. There were rumors of private collectors, rogue treasure hunters, and clandestine organizations moving quietly to stake claims. Security was tight, yet the possibility of interference loomed. The first incidents of sabotage were just the beginning. Now there was potential for more deliberate and calculated threats. The manuscripts provided subtle but clear warnings. Phrases like "only the worthy shall proceed," and "only the patient shall inherit truth," and "those who act with haste shall awaken peril," reinforced the idea that the Templars' network was designed as both a guide and a test. Each step required not only intelligence but integrity. Missteps could result in loss, destruction, or exposure to danger. As the researchers delved deeper into the manuscripts, they discovered references to a Templar network spanning beyond France, locations in Spain, Italy, and even the Holy Land. This suggested that the discoveries in Paris and Burgundy were just the initial stages of a far-reaching system. The Templars had created a global trail, accessible only to those capable of interpreting centuries-old codes correctly. Meanwhile, tension within the teams intensified. Some scholars argued for extreme caution, proposing that each step of the sequence be verified repeatedly before proceeding. Others, driven by curiosity and urgency, pushed to follow the next steps immediately. Arguments became heated, and alliances within the team shifted as personalities and priorities clashed. The discoveries were no longer purely academic. They were tests of character, patience, and judgment. The breakthrough also raised critical ethical questions. If the knowledge hidden by the Templars could be misused, who had the right to access it? Scholars debated whether to keep certain findings secret or release them for public study. Some argued that the Templars had intended for the knowledge to be revealed only to those who could follow the path correctly, suggesting that indiscriminate sharing could undermine centuries of careful planning. Amid all this, external pressures increased. Reports of individuals lurking near the sites, attempting to gain access, and even attempting minor sabotage became more frequent. It was clear that the stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. The Templars' warnings about consequences seemed less symbolic and more real with every passing day. Despite the risks, the breakthrough marked a turning point. The first major sequence had been successfully decoded, proving that the manuscripts and relics were not random or purely symbolic. They were a sophisticated network designed to convey knowledge and test the worthiness of those who discovered it. For the first time, the scholars had a tangible understanding of the Templars' intentions. I realized that this was more than history. The Templars had created a system that endured centuries, a carefully designed challenge that combined intellect, morality, and patience. And now, with the first sequence completed, the path forward was becoming clearer, but the dangers were real, immediate, and growing. As I closed my notes that night, I understood something profound. The discoveries were no longer just about relics or manuscripts. They were about the Templars' vision, their tests, and the human capacity to follow a path designed across centuries. Every decision, every interpretation, and every action carried weight beyond the present. And the story was only beginning to reach the heights of its most dangerous and revealing chapters. The Templars had left a legacy, a challenge meant to endure time. And now, centuries later, that challenge was unfolding, testing not only knowledge but character, judgment, and the ability to survive the trials embedded within history itself. After the first major breakthrough, it became clear that the Templars' network of relics, manuscripts, and hidden chambers was far larger and more intricate than anyone had imagined. The discoveries in Paris and Burgundy were only the beginning. References in the manuscripts hinted at locations in Spain, Italy, and even the Holy Land. This was not a local secret, it was a global system, designed to transmit knowledge, preserve artifacts, and test those who sought it across continents. The idea that these relics were part of a worldwide Templar network electrified the scholars but also magnified the risks. Coordinating expeditions to foreign sites required diplomacy, resources, and meticulous planning. And with each step, the potential for interference, from rival historians, collectors, or more dangerous individuals, grew exponentially. The first international expedition was to a monastery in northern Spain. According to the decoded manuscripts, a series of hidden compartments in the chapel and crypt contained artifacts and instructions directly linked to those found in France. The team traveled discreetly, avoiding media attention and outsiders who might learn of their mission. Even so, tension ran high. Footprints, strange observations, and unexplained disturbances at previous sites had taught them that vigilance was essential. Upon arrival, the scholars began examining the monastery with precision. The Templars' craftsmanship was immediately apparent. Subtle carvings in the walls, intricate floor patterns, and hidden mechanisms suggested centuries of planning. A secret compartment beneath the altar yielded a small chest containing medallions, engraved stones, and documents confirming the Templars' global network. It was remarkable, yet unsettling. Every artifact was a reminder that they were following a centuries-old path fraught with potential danger. Back in France, reports of interference increased. One site in rural Burgundy had been ransacked, leaving behind evidence of a break-in. Objects had been moved, some slightly damaged, and signs indicated that someone had been attempting to replicate the Templars' decoding methods. Scholars suspected the involvement of private collectors or clandestine groups motivated by greed. The Templars' warnings about consequences were no longer abstract. They were real and immediate. This external pressure created tension within the team. Some members argued for extreme caution, insisting that international sites be accessed only after comprehensive security measures were in place. Others, frustrated by delays, argued that waiting would risk losing the trail altogether. Arguments became heated, alliances shifted, and the moral complexity of the task became clearer. The Templars' challenge was as much about human integrity as it was about knowledge. Meanwhile, the manuscripts continued to reveal patterns. Certain sequences of symbols and objects suggested a deliberate system of checks and balances. The Templars had designed a network where missteps would not just prevent access but could trigger consequences. Mechanical traps, hidden hazards, or even structural collapses designed to protect the secrets. Scholars debated whether these warnings were symbolic or practical, but the growing incidence of interference and sabotage made them reconsider. In Spain, the discoveries revealed an additional layer of complexity. The artifacts included astronomical instruments and diagrams that aligned with specific celestial events. It became clear that the Templars had not only hidden objects for safekeeping but had also encoded instructions for precise timing, suggesting that knowledge could only be fully understood or activated under exact conditions. This raised questions about the remaining locations. How many required similar celestial alignments? How many steps had yet to be revealed? The global scope of the network also brought moral dilemmas to the forefront. Should all discoveries be documented and shared, risking exposure to those with malicious intent? Or should the team proceed cautiously, keeping some information hidden to preserve the integrity of the Templars' plan? The manuscripts seemed to imply that wisdom, patience, and discernment were part of the test. But human impatience and curiosity were proving difficult to manage. Tension escalated further when reports suggested that some artifacts had been observed disappearing from remote locations under suspicious circumstances. Scholars feared that rogue elements were attempting to shortcut the Templar system, seeking knowledge or treasure without following the intended path. The consequences, as the manuscripts repeatedly warned, could be severe. Some suggested that the Templars had built safeguards or warnings into these sites precisely to prevent such misuse. I realized that the story was no longer about isolated discoveries. The Templars had created a living system, a chain of knowledge and challenges spanning centuries and continents. Each step forward was not only a revelation but a test of patience, morality, intellect, and courage. And now, with interference and sabotage increasing, the stakes had escalated to levels no one had anticipated. Even as the team decoded more manuscripts and uncovered more artifacts, they began to notice patterns hinting at the ultimate purpose of the network. The Templars had not just hidden wealth or objects, they had left instructions for the preservation of sacred knowledge, strategic planning, and perhaps even insights into leadership and human behavior. The artifacts were a guide, a moral compass, and a puzzle all at once. At night, I reviewed the latest expedition reports and sketches of newly discovered sites. The Templars' foresight became increasingly evident. They had designed a system that could endure centuries, testing those who discovered it while protecting knowledge from misuse. Yet, the human factor, greed, impatience, and recklessness, threatened to disrupt the network. The manuscripts' repeated warnings about consequences were no longer theoretical. They were warnings to the living. I realized something profound. The Templars had created more than a hidden network of relics. They had designed a test, a challenge meant to be completed by those who could follow their path wisely and patiently. And now, with the first international sites revealed and interference escalating, the test was real, immediate, and far from over. The story of the Templar relics was no longer just about history or archaeology. It was about human nature, judgment, and the ability to navigate a centuries-old legacy with integrity. And I understood that the coming discoveries, the next sites, the remaining manuscripts, and the final challenges, would demand not only intellect and skill but also courage, morality, and respect for the vision of those who had crafted this extraordinary puzzle centuries ago. By the time the team reached part 12 of the manuscript-driven journey, it was clear that the Templars' network of relics, manuscripts, and hidden chambers held more than historical or ceremonial significance. The latest discoveries revealed hints of the Templars' ultimate goal, a purpose so profound and meticulously hidden that it demanded respect, patience, and intelligence to understand. The breakthrough came at a monastery in southern Italy. Based on the manuscripts and medallion sequences, the scholars had located a sealed crypt beneath the chapel floor. The structure was fragile, centuries of decay making every step risky. Despite this, the team moved carefully, documenting every inch, measuring structural supports, and following the Templar instructions precisely. Every object, symbol, and mark mattered. Inside, they discovered a series of chambers interconnected by narrow passages, each containing artifacts and manuscripts that had never been seen before. Some objects appeared ceremonial, others were functional tools, possibly for navigation, astronomy, or measurement. But the most significant discovery was a series of manuscripts that, when interpreted alongside previously discovered texts, formed a coherent narrative. The Templars had created a global network designed to preserve sacred knowledge and guide select individuals toward wisdom and strategy across generations. The revelations were astonishing. The Templars had not only hidden wealth or objects, they had encoded centuries of knowledge, insight, and instructions for leadership, moral conduct, and strategic planning. Their network spanned multiple countries, each site contributing pieces of a larger puzzle. To access the ultimate truth, one had to follow the relic sequences perfectly, interpret the symbols accurately, and respect the moral framework embedded in the manuscripts. The discovery immediately raised tension within the teams. Scholars realized that the stakes were higher than ever. Any misstep could destroy a critical piece of history, or worse, place them in direct danger. Interference from outsiders had already been reported at several sites. Private collectors and clandestine groups were increasingly bold, attempting to replicate Templar methods without understanding the intricacies of the instructions. Some had already caused minor sabotage, but the potential for catastrophe loomed large. The manuscripts contained repeated warnings. Those who rush shall awaken peril. Only the patient shall inherit truth. Misuse shall bear consequences unforeseen. Scholars began to interpret these warnings as practical precautions, not merely moral guidance. The Templars had anticipated human greed, impatience, and curiosity. Their instructions were designed to protect the knowledge and the seekers alike, and perhaps even to test the character of those who followed the path. During the expedition, a near-catastrophic incident occurred. While exploring a hidden passage, a structural collapse nearly trapped several team members. Fortunately, precautions and careful movement prevented disaster, but the event underscored the physical dangers of accessing centuries-old relics. Scholars began emphasizing safety even more strictly, understanding that the Templars had anticipated both human error and environmental risk. This incident also highlighted the increasing external threats. Rumors suggested that groups had observed the team from a distance, waiting for opportunities to exploit the discoveries. Security measures were tightened, but the possibility of interference added a layer of anxiety to every step. Each expedition now required vigilance not just against natural hazards, but against human intent. Despite the dangers, the discoveries continued. Scholars found diagrams connecting sites across Europe with astronomical alignments, mechanical devices that might have been used for calculation or prediction, and encoded instructions that appeared to map out a sequence for uncovering the ultimate chamber, a location that might contain the Templars' most closely guarded knowledge. I followed the reports with a mix of awe and trepidation. The Templars' foresight was extraordinary. They had anticipated centuries of persecution, war, and human error. Their network was designed to endure and to test those who sought it. Each discovery was a testament to their intelligence, patience, and understanding of human nature. As the global network became clearer, moral dilemmas intensified. Should scholars share findings with the public? Could the knowledge fall into the wrong hands? And how could they ensure that the Templars' intended sequence was followed precisely, without interference from those motivated by greed or ambition. These questions became central to the expedition's strategy. The manuscripts also revealed that the Templars had encoded lessons in morality and judgment into the sequence of relics. One misstep could invalidate a discovery, destroy an artifact, or compromise the integrity of the knowledge. Scholars began to understand that following the Templars' path was as much about ethical discernment as it was about intelligence or skill. By the end of the expedition, it became clear that the Templars' ultimate goal was not wealth, power, or conquest. It was the preservation of knowledge and guidance for those capable of using it wisely, designed to endure centuries of human imperfection and to reward patience, integrity, and wisdom. The realization was profound. This network was a test of character as much as a puzzle of history. As I reflected on the reports, the near-catastrophic incident, and the revelations of the manuscripts, I realized that the story was entering its most dangerous and critical phase. The Templars' ultimate goal had been revealed, but the journey to uncover it fully was far from over. Every step forward required precision, judgment, and courage. And with external threats and increasing sabotage, the team was navigating a path as treacherous as it was enlightening. The Templars had left a legacy that demanded respect. And now, centuries later, those who sought it were learning just how carefully, cunningly, and deliberately that legacy had been constructed. With the Templars' ultimate goal partially revealed, the story entered its most intense and dangerous phase. The global network of relics and manuscripts pointed to one final destination, a chamber so secret, so carefully hidden, that it had remained untouched for centuries. Scholars understood that reaching it required not only intellect but patience, discipline, and strict adherence to the Templars' encoded sequence. One misstep could destroy the chamber or place the explorers in danger. Tension among the teams escalated rapidly. The stakes were higher than ever. With multiple parties aware of the relics, including private collectors and clandestine groups, the scholars were effectively in a race. Security measures were tightened, but the vast number of sites and the complexity of the instructions made it impossible to predict every move. Every expedition now felt like a battle, not just against time and decay, but against human greed and impatience. The first sign of real sabotage came at a site in southern France. A small explosion, likely intended to collapse part of a hidden chamber, had destroyed several artifacts and forced the team to evacuate. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Others were actively trying to intercept the Templars' legacy. It was a wake-up call. The Templars' warnings about consequences were no longer theoretical, they were happening in real time. Despite the danger, the teams pressed on. Using the manuscript sequences, they traveled to remote estates, monasteries, and ruins across Europe. Each location contained artifacts, symbols, and instructions that formed part of the final puzzle. The process was meticulous. Medallions were placed according to ancient diagrams, manuscripts were cross-referenced, and astronomical alignments were observed with precision. One mistake could invalidate months of careful work. The manuscripts hinted that the final chamber contained a synthesis of all the knowledge the Templars had preserved. It would likely reveal insights into strategy, morality, leadership, and perhaps hidden treasures or sacred artifacts. But the Templars had encoded layers of tests and protections to ensure that only those capable of understanding the network correctly could access it. Every artifact, every symbol, every sequence was a safeguard as much as it was a key. As the teams approached the final locations, the pressure intensified. Scholars debated strategies, weighed risks, and argued over interpretations. Outside forces lurked in the shadows, attempting to follow or disrupt the process. Some team members feared that human error or interference might destroy the entire network before the final chamber could be reached. In the midst of this, a breakthrough occurred at a secluded estate in northern Italy. By carefully following the manuscript sequences, the team uncovered a hidden passage beneath a chapel floor. The path was narrow, dimly lit, and fraught with physical hazards, collapsed sections, fragile stonework, and narrow stairways. Every step had to be deliberate. The tension was palpable. One wrong move could trigger a collapse or destroy centuries-old artifacts. As they descended, the Templars' foresight became increasingly clear. The hidden passages, the encoded symbols, and the carefully arranged artifacts were not random. They were designed to test patience, caution, and respect. Even the smallest misinterpretation could render the discoveries meaningless or trigger unintended consequences. The final chamber itself was unlike anything previously encountered. Its entrance was concealed beneath an intricate floor mosaic, perfectly aligned with a celestial pattern indicated in the manuscripts. Inside, the scholars found artifacts, medallions, engraved stones, and manuscripts that synthesized the knowledge gathered from all previous locations. It was the culmination of centuries of Templar planning. But the danger was not over. External threats were closing in. Surveillance suggested that rival groups had tracked the team to the estate. Every decision now required balancing the urgency of discovery with security. Scholars debated whether to proceed immediately or take additional precautions. The manuscripts emphasized careful action, and any rush could have catastrophic consequences. Inside the chamber, the team carefully arranged artifacts according to the Templars' instructions. Manuscripts were cross-referenced, and medallions aligned with engraved patterns on the floor. As the final sequences were completed, a hidden compartment slowly revealed itself, a space containing what appeared to be the most sacred and significant artifacts, as well as manuscripts detailing centuries of knowledge. The atmosphere was electric. After centuries of secrecy, meticulous planning, and careful decoding, the Templars' ultimate chamber had been accessed. Scholars understood that they were witnessing the culmination of a carefully designed legacy, a network intended to preserve wisdom, test integrity, and ensure that knowledge was entrusted only to those capable of respecting it. Even as the chamber revealed its secrets, the external threat remained. Security personnel guarded entrances, and scholars worked with extreme caution. The Templars' legacy had survived centuries of conflict, decay, and secrecy, but the present moment proved that human greed and impatience were the final challenges. Every step forward required vigilance, discipline, and moral clarity. I realized then that the Templars had left more than objects or knowledge. They had left a living test, designed to endure centuries, challenge humanity, and reward those who approached it with patience, respect, and understanding. And now, after centuries of waiting, the challenge had reached its climax. The story was no longer just about history or archaeology. It was about human integrity, judgment, and the ability to navigate a centuries-old legacy without succumbing to haste, greed, or recklessness. The Templars' ultimate goal had been revealed, but the responsibility of those who discovered it was immediate, intense, and ongoing. The final chamber had been accessed, the sequences completed, and the Templars' ultimate legacy revealed. Yet the moment was far from simple triumph. The culmination of centuries of careful planning, secret knowledge, and moral testing brought clarity, awe, and profound responsibility. The team of scholars, security personnel, and careful observers stood in silence, absorbing the weight of what they had uncovered. Inside the chamber, the artifacts and manuscripts formed a coherent whole. Ancient medallions aligned with engraved floors. Instruments for astronomy, navigation, and measurement lay in their intended positions. The manuscripts contained not only historical records but instructions, strategies, and insights into governance, morality, and human behavior. The Templars had encoded lessons for leadership, justice, and wisdom. Knowledge meant to guide generations of those capable of understanding it. One of the most remarkable revelations was the Templars' philosophy on human nature. They had anticipated greed, impatience, and conflict. That was why the network was painstakingly layered, a challenge not just of intellect but of ethics and patience. Every sequence, symbol, and warning was designed to test integrity. Those who rushed, acted selfishly, or misinterpreted the instructions were denied access. Those who approached with respect, care, and understanding could inherit centuries of wisdom. Outside the chamber, tensions were still high. Surveillance indicated that rival groups, collectors, treasure hunters, and rogue organizations were nearby, attempting to gain access or replicate the sequences. Security teams were on high alert. It was clear that the Templars' caution, which had protected these secrets for centuries, was still necessary today. The network was not just a historical puzzle. It was a living challenge, still relevant and potentially dangerous. As the scholars began documenting the findings, they faced an ethical crossroads. Should the knowledge be shared widely, or preserved for select individuals capable of understanding it responsibly? Some argued that public dissemination could risk misuse. Others felt that transparency was essential. The manuscripts themselves suggested restraint, patience, and moral discernment, emphasizing that knowledge carries responsibility as much as it carries power. The process of cataloging, photographing, and carefully moving artifacts became almost ritualistic. Every step, every action, was guided by the Templars' original intentions. The team worked with meticulous patience, aware that mistakes could undo centuries of careful preservation. It was no longer just archaeology, it was stewardship of a centuries-old moral and intellectual legacy. One artifact in particular stood out, a series of engraved stones depicting interlocking geometric patterns. When interpreted according to the manuscripts, they revealed a map of knowledge and networks, connecting the discovered sites across Europe and hinting at further locations beyond current reach. It became clear that the Templars' network was even more extensive than previously imagined, a global system designed to guide and test humanity across generations. In that moment, the scholars understood something profound. The Templars had created not just a series of hidden chambers and relics, they had crafted a legacy of learning, wisdom, and ethical responsibility. Their network survived centuries of persecution, war, and decay, but its ultimate purpose was moral as much as it was practical: to test human character and reward patience, understanding, and integrity. As the team carefully retraced their steps to secure the chamber, I reflected on the broader implications. The Templars' strategy had worked perfectly. They had preserved knowledge and simultaneously tested the intentions of those who sought it. Human greed had been partially revealed in the interference and sabotage from outsiders, while the scholars who followed the sequence carefully had demonstrated patience, integrity, and intellectual discipline. The Templars' foresight was astonishing, centuries-old tests unfolding perfectly in modern times. The final lesson was clear: knowledge is powerful, but only when approached responsibly. The Templars' warnings about consequences were not threats, they were instructions on how to navigate discovery wisely. Those who respected the sequence, the symbols, and the ethical framework inherited not just historical artifacts, but a guide to understanding human nature, leadership, and moral responsibility across time. In the days following the discoveries, the Templars' global network continued to be studied, catalogued, and secured. Scholars agreed on a cautious approach to sharing the knowledge, preserving its integrity while making lessons accessible to those capable of appreciating its depth. External threats were neutralized or monitored, ensuring the legacy would survive intact. The story of the Templar relics, manuscripts, and hidden chambers became more than history. It became a testament to human ingenuity, foresight, and moral guidance. The Templars had created a system that endured centuries, tested human nature, and rewarded wisdom and patience. And now, centuries later, that legacy had been fulfilled, proving that knowledge, carefully hidden and thoughtfully revealed, can transcend time itself. As I reviewed the final reports, I realized that this was not just a story of discovery. It was a story of endurance, intelligence, morality, and responsibility. The Templars' challenge had been met, but the lessons endured: patience over haste, wisdom over greed, respect over impulsiveness. And in that understanding, the ultimate secret of the Templars was revealed. Not merely the artifacts themselves, but the timeless principles they encoded for the future. The journey, fraught with tension, sabotage, and near disasters, had come to its conclusion. But the legacy, the moral and intellectual inheritance of the Templars, would continue, guiding those who approached it with integrity, curiosity, and respect for the vision of those who had crafted this extraordinary puzzle centuries ago.